more fun part of the evening for me, which is to introduce our speaker, who is Stef Pearse. Some of you will already know her. Of course, she's not only a member, but our spider recorder. Stef's an ecologist. She wore Jacobs. Before she became an ecologist, was a volunteer. She worked for 5 years in the Wildlife Trust, the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, and also with Natural England, while she was studying for a master's degree at Edge Hill. And Stef tells us that it was there at Edge Hill that she finally overcame a lifelong fear of spiders. What do you know? And I am sincerely hoping that Stef's talk is going to enable me to overcome my lifelong fear of spiders. Stef's also interested in bats and badgers and something else beginning with B. What was it? Botany. That's right, botany. And she's also got 4 rats. She's interested in small mammals too. The rats are called Jasper, Jane, Curly and Mo. I thought you might like to know. All right, Stef. Well, without further ado, I will shut up and let you begin your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Right. I'm going to share my screen. Right, you should all be able to see this now. So yeah, I'm Stef Pearse. I'm your spider recorder at the Wharfedale Naturalists. And fittingly, I'm going to be giving you a talk about spiders just a few days after Halloween. But I'm hoping that after this talk, spiders won't be creepy or spooky. They'll actually be more interesting for you. And the talk will basically involve a run through of how to identify your spiders, how to go from, first of all, identifying whether you have a spider, because that can sometimes be confusing. And then running from that point to which family of spiders your spider belongs to then looking at how you get from family of spider to species of spider. I'll also run through how to conduct a thorough spider survey, and I'll go through some of the more common species that you can hopefully ID just by eye, just in and around your home or garden or local green space. So I've started with this slide. Unfortunately, I think that spiders have a bit of a bad reputation, and I don't think that the tabloids really help with that. You often find articles that are quite alarming and are often misleading and not very factual. It's important to note that you don't need to worry about spiders in this country, luckily. We have no spiders that can kill us in the UK, which is excellent. I actually have never been bitten by a spider, and I don't know anyone that has, even though I've picked up many spiders. I have been bitten by beetles, and I've been bitten an awful lot by flies. Horse flies are the worst. However, you don't really see articles about that in many tabloids. So I think it's quite misleading, really, to get things like this that are scaring people. And I think often when in situations such as this, if people do come into difficulties after having been bitten by a spider, often I think it's probably the case that it could be just a secondary infection because the wound hasn't been kept clean. It could even be the case that something else bit them but fled the scene of the crime, and spiders were left behind and maybe got the blame. So you don't need to worry about them. Spiders are actually very interesting and you don't need to worry about them. So spiders are found almost everywhere. They are predators and they prey on other invertebrates as well as, well, including other spiders. They're also a food source for a wide range of animals. Reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals, lots of things eat spiders and rely on spiders. Because of this, they have quite a key place in the food chain, and they can be actually quite useful indicators for biodiversity, signs of health. If you have a lot of spiders, you've got a really good habitat. And there is also some evidence to suggest that they're important in pest control. And there's quite a few scientific papers online that will detail how spiders have had an impact on crop yields, and how they can help increase yield by eating pests. So firstly, I'll talk about how you actually distinguish that you have a spider from an insect. So spiders, they are arachnids. They have two body parts. They have a cephalothorax, which is basically a body part that has a head and a thorax, and also they have an abdomen on a separate body part segment, whereas insects have three body part segments. Spiders have 4 pairs of legs always, unless they've been in a fight. Insects have 3 pairs of legs. Spiders have simple eyes, whereas insects have compound eyes. If you think of the eyes of a fly, that's a compound eye, which spiders don't have. They never have wings, and insects can have wings. Spiders don't have antennae. People often think that they do, but what they're seeing is actually called a pedipalps, which I'll go into in a few slides. But they don't have antennae, whereas insects do. And spiders don't go through any kind of metamorphosis. So when they emerge from an egg, they're basically just miniature versions of how they will always look, whereas insects will go through metamorphosis, like to larva to pupa, for example. So how do you tell spiders apart from other arachnids? So we have other arachnids in the UK. We have harvestmen, pseudoscorpions, mites. The way to tell your spiders apart from those can be tricky, and some people do mistake, especially harvestmen, for spiders. So here is an example from my favourite field guide, Britain Spiders, to kind of illustrate the difference, how something that many people will call a daddy longlegs can actually be one of 3 things. So our first picture here is actually the spider. You can see, well, you can't tell very clearly, but there is a very small cephalothorax and an abdomen. So you've got your 2 body parts and you've got your 8 legs. The picture in the middle is a harvestman. So there is an arachnid, it's got 8 legs, but it's actually just got 1 body part. And our last picture there is actually a fly, which is an insect. So it's got it's 6 legs and it's got wings. It's kind of a clue. But it does highlight really the importance of using common names. Using Latin names and avoiding using common names, because common names can often refer to numerous species, which can cause confusion. So worldwide, there are approximately 109 families, and there's at least 45,000 species of spider. And I say at least because there's bound to be a lot more than that. It's just that we haven't found them yet. In the UK, we have 37 of those families, which is approximately 670 species. Interestingly, about half of those species are actually belonging to one family, which is the money spider family. Spider families have different characteristics which will help tell them apart. They have different appearances, life histories, hunting strategies, and preferred habitats. This is because they occupy different niches in ecosystems, which I can talk about in a couple of slides. It's quite interesting that all spiders produce silk, but they don't all produce webs. Only 4 of our spiders actually produce a classic orb web. 4 families of our spiders produce an orb web that people think of as the normal spider. And narrowing your spider down to the correct family is really the first step in your spider identification, because from here you'll be able to then figure out which species of spider you've got, and it will really narrow it down for you. So here is an example of some different spider hunting strategies. It's not all of them, but some of them. Because spiders have a range of niches, they have different hunting strategies, which depends on which prey they're likely to encounter. So we have the spiders that produce webs, which I just mentioned. There are actually 8 different types of web in the UK. And you can actually use the type of web as a clue as to which spider you've got. But it can be difficult because some different species or different families can produce similar looking webs, which are actually quite different in function. And there's a lot of information out there about spider webs because they're actually quite complex structures. And there is a book that I'll talk about in a bit that has quite a good chapter on that. That might be interesting. But I won't go into too much detail about it today because I could talk for probably an hour just about webs. Other spider hunting strategies, we have the ground running hunters. Classic example is the wolf spider family. They live on the ground, they don't spin webs, they have pretty good eyesight for finding their prey and chasing it down. They're very quick and quite athletic in appearance as well. There are ambush spiders. An example of this is a fen raft spider, which is one of the UK's biggest spiders. This spider will actually sit with its feet touching the surface of the water, and it will feel for any vibrations, and it will wait in ambush for its prey. It will feel for it to get closer and then pounce on it. Mimicry is used by some spiders. There's an example here of an ant mimic spider, which will be living amongst the ants, and the ants won't know, they won't realise that it's actually going to eat them, which is quite cool. Jumping spiders, which are my personal favourite. They also have pretty good eyesight. They're actually one of the few spiders that might be aware of you, be aware of the fact that you are a living person and not just an obstacle in their way. And they'll actually look at you and follow you around. And they're quite feisty, even though they're usually really, really small spiders. They will pounce on their prey, and they're able to jump quite far. And some spiders actually have really cool camouflage. So the example here is a crab spider, Missamina vatia, which actually changes colour depending on the flower that it's sat in. So when you are trying to identify which species of spider you've got, or even at the family stage, you will have to have a close look at them. You'll probably have to look under a microscope. A hand lens does suffice for some types of spiders. Spiders that are big enough for you to tell, but most of the time you will have to rely on a microscope. It can be quite tricky because a photo often can't help you differentiate species of spider, because some of them just look so similar. You really do have to examine them under a microscope, which I'll go into in a bit later. But some of the diagnostic features that you look for to help you figure out what kind of spider you've got, you will be looking at the number of eyes that it has. Spiders can have either 6 or 8 eyes. You'll be looking at how these eyes are arranged. Spiders have spinners to produce silk, and they have different spinner appearances depending on what kind of webs they might spin or how they use the silk if they don't make webs. Female spiders have epigynes, and male spiders have pedipalps, which I mentioned previously. That's their reproductive organs. which are really key in identifying your spider to species. Often you can only rely on these particular organs to tell what species you've got, which I'll go into later as well. And I would say it might look complicated at first. So this is a diagram of anatomy, and there seems to be a lot of technical jargon, and it seems to be quite scary at first, but it's actually not. If you would use this in conjunction with a key. So you'd use the key and it would ask you to look at a particular part of the spider. So you'd refer to the diagram and work your way through it. And it's straightforward, and it can actually be quite fun and therapeutic to do. So I mentioned spider eye arrangement to help you identify your spider. So this is to help you get to family level. Different spider families have different eye arrangements, as you can see in the diagram there. So this is quite a useful picture. At first, when I first started having an interest in spiders and identifying spiders, it took me a while to get my head around the terminology. So I've put a diagram on here to help. If any of you do decide that you might want to have a go at identifying spiders yourself, you can share the slides around. But you would basically be looking to see the shape of the two rows of eyes, whether they're recurved or procurved. So I kind of like to think of them as like a smiley face or a sad face, and how they are arranged on its cephalothorax or on its head. And you can see on the photo down here, I've put a wolf spider, and that's a Lycosidae. So if you look at the picture directly above it, that's Lycosidae. And you can kind of see how the eyes are arranged similarly. So you've got two forward-facing, quite big eyes because they have good eyesight. Two eyes that are kind of looking backwards a bit, and four smaller eyes at the bottom. So survey techniques. So I've mentioned that spiders are found basically everywhere. If you wanted to do a full spider survey to help you have an idea of species richness, for example, of a nature reserve, you would have to employ a suite of surveys of all the different places where spiders might be to get a full picture of the diversity of your site. So some of the different techniques here are employed by entomologists. So you would use pitfall traps to catch ground hunting spiders. A pitfall trap is basically just a pot that's buried in the ground that a spider might run into and fall in, and they won't be able to get out again, basically. A sweep net would be used. This would be really used for surveying vegetation like tall grass. So you would sweep the tall grass and see what's in your net. And hopefully that will give you a good range of spiders. You would use beating of trees and shrubs. So I've got a picture here straight from the catalogue of what that actually means. I've never actually used one that looks like this. I normally just grab a stick off the ground and whack a tree with it. And basically anything that's there in the leaves will drop down and fall into the tray. And then you'd collect it up and put it in a sample pot. You could just do a general ground search, checking underneath logs, leaf litter and things like that. And for spiders, to be honest, a torchlight search can be really beneficial. And I recommend it if you do find this talk interesting and you want to go and have a look to see for yourself what spiders you've got. There's a lot of merit in simply walking around your garden outside your house at night time with a torch to see what's coming out. Under windowsills and things like that can be quite interesting. So your equipment list, if you are going to do a full survey, a puter is just the best thing ever for entomologists. You can make them yourself, and Countryfile have got a how to make a puter diagram on their website, or you can buy them. And you basically use this to, it's like a straw mechanism. You suck up your specimen or your spider or beetle or whatever it is you're collecting from the ground, and then it falls into the chamber. But there is some mesh that stops that from being sucked up into your mouth, so you don't accidentally eat it. You would need to have some specimen tubes to put your samples into, and you would normally try and keep your specimen tubes separate for each survey type and of each habitat as well, so you knew exactly where you got your specimens from, and because that's going to be really important later on, which I'll go into in the next slide, for your labels. And you will also need alcohol to preserve your samples. Unfortunately, I think I've mentioned briefly that to identify most spiders to species, you do have to look at them under the microscope, and you need them to be still. So unfortunately, this does mean that you have to have them killed in alcohol first, which isn't a pleasant thing to do. And it's not something to be done lightly, I don't think either. I think I'm not condoning it, and I wouldn't suggest that we all go out and just kill all the spiders. I think it's important to do, and we need to have that data and that research. But I would say if I would only preserve my specimens if I intended to identify it to species, and if I was going to submit that record, or that record was actually going to be important and of use. I wouldn't do it willy-nilly. You'll need to make sure that your samples and your specimen tubes do have a label. So I usually have a pencil and paper and a pair of scissors as well to cut my label down to size, to pop that in the specimen tube. I've put a little comment in here to say that before you write your species name, which you actually might not know at this point, you would probably need to wait until you've got to a microscope and check to see what species you've got before you would actually fully write that label and pop it in the tube. But I would normally double check the name of the species on the World Spider Catalogue. So this is a website that has all of the taxonomic Latin names of all the spiders, and this is constantly being updated. And spider Latin names are constantly changing. For example, it wasn't that long ago that the house spider was called something completely different. As we advance in taxonomy and we're able to do more with genetics, we can actually figure out where the order in which species live a bit more accurately. So you do find that the names change quite a lot. So I would just do a quick check for that. I would, on my equipment list, I'd also take a torch. I mentioned the benefits of having a torch, and a hand lens as well. A hand lens is really such a useful tool to take with you if you're looking for spiders or even other invertebrates as well. You can pick up a hand lens quite cheaply online. My favourite hand lens is one, it's a jeweler's hand lens. I think I bought it for £6 off, I think it was Amazon or something. But it's brilliant because it's got 2 light settings on it as well, so it really helps you to see the spiders a bit clearer, which is very important, as I'll come to shortly. So labelling up your samples, so you've collected your spiders and you've looked at them under the microscope and you figured out your species. So you need to now make sure your label has all the information that is required to provide a full record. So this would need to have the date in it and the full name of the person who has identified it. I've put in an OS grid reference, 10 figures, so 10-figure OS grid reference. You can get a lot of different apps that will give you a grid reference now, actually out in the field. And there are websites as well to help you. But a 10-figure grid reference is accurate enough to tell the recorders where exactly your spider came from. I would then put in my species name, the Latin name. I wouldn't put on the common name, always Latin. I would also put in how I've sampled for it. So did I sweep it in a net, or did I find it ground searching, or using the beating method? And a brief description of the habitat that you found it is also really useful. And this gives the spider recorder everything that you might need. So to identify your spider to species level, I've mentioned that you need a microscope for this. So you can identify some species visually, but not very many. There are some that you can identify with a hand lens, but again, it's not very many. Most spiders you will need a powerful microscope with extra light. You'll also need a petri dish, and ideally with glass beads or sand in it with water. So the reason it's useful to have glass beads and water in a petri dish to put your spider into while you look at it under the microscope is so that you can manipulate it and move it around and get the right angles without accidentally damaging your spider, because they have quite soft bodies. And if you accidentally squish them while you're moving them, then you won't be able to identify them. And the extra light really helps as well, because some of the features that you need to look at to identify your species are very tiny. So as much light as possible is really useful, especially if you are interested in identifying money spiders, which are notoriously quite difficult. But very interesting, but you do need to have a high-powered microscope for that. And I've put on a couple of useful guides at the bottom. At the end of the presentation, I've provided links to where you can purchase them if you wanted to. How to identify spider males and females apart. So mature males have what some people call boxing gloves. That's their pedipalps. They are the organs that spiders use to transfer sperm to the females. And when they're sexually mature, these pedipalps become larger, and that's when they get the boxing glove appearance. And mature females have epigynes, which are on the underside of their abdomen. And each species has a slightly differently looking epigyne, which helps you determine species and tell them apart. It's tricky when your spiders aren't mature, because sometimes this means you can't identify the species because you're missing those features. So I always try to sample mature spiders if it's possible and if you can tell. And this is how those two bits fit together. So male and a female. So I've put, this is just a photo straight out the book, example of how these organs look under a microscope and how you determine species. So you can probably tell why you might need a lot of light and magnification. You're basically trying to fit your specimen with the one that looks the most likely. And you really need a microscope that's 80 or 90 times magnification to get close enough to see. Because there is a lot very subtle differences sometimes between species, so it is quite tricky and there is a knack to it. But when you get the knack, it's really satisfying, and it's hard at first, but with a bit of practice, it does get easier. And you basically would be looking for slight differences in pedipalp appearance, which is on the right, or epigyne appearance, which is on the left. And this is the two guides that I really recommend, especially if you are just starting out as an amateur. Britain Spiders, a Field Guide, is fairly new, and it's I think it's only the second book, or the only book in print, but the second book that has photos of Britain spiders to help you identify them. It's a really, really good book for in the field, and it actually also tells you whether you can identify your spiders visually, or if you need a hand lens, or if you need a microscope. It provides a chart to let you know that. And it also provides rough distribution maps. And yeah, it's really good. And then I would say the Collins Field Guide book is also really detailed, and it's really informative. And I would say ideally a combination of the two will really help. I would start with Britain Spiders and then work my way to the Collins Field Guide personally. But I do have both of those, and they are very good. So I'll talk a little bit about now the UK species of spider. So we've got two legally protected species. We've got the fen raft spider, which is one of the biggest UK spiders. I've mentioned it previously. But it's protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act because it's present in such low numbers. And it's only really found down south, unfortunately. All the interesting spiders tend to be in the south. It's one of only two species in the UK that are in its particular Dolomedes family. I've mentioned it's an ambush hunter. It sits and waits for vibrations in the water to indicate that it's prey there. And it's actually got its own website. There is a fen raft spider project ongoing where they are reintroducing species in East Anglia, which looks to have successfully established new populations, which is really, really good. And our next legally protected species is the ladybird spider, which is a very pretty looking spider. It's sexually dimorphic, which means that the males and the females look different in appearance. The males are the ones that look prettiest, so the ones that look like ladybirds. And again, this is protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. They're the only member of the Eresidae family, which means velvet spider, in the UK. And they're only found in one site in Dorset, but they are currently looking to do relocations, which seem to be going well. And that project's been undertaken at an RSPB reserve down in Dorset. And I'll do a little bit about spiders that you might be able to identify at home, which you can identify visually. You don't need a hand lens or a microscope. So the first one is one that's probably quite common to most of you. You've probably seen this one. This is Fulcus phalangioides, the cellar spider. It's the one that's also sometimes called daddy long leg spider. It's got the long spindly legs, and it tends to be in ceilings or in cellars. They eat a lot. They're very successful predators. They'll eat a lot of other spiders. They'll take on a giant house spider. And you can tell them apart on appearance. There are a couple of other species in this family, but they look quite different. They look different enough for you to be able to tell them apart. So you can see its abdomen is kind of elongated. I think it looks a little bit like a coffee bean shape. And you can see that its cephalothorax, its head and thorax body part, is pale, and it's got that darker patch in the middle. And these spiders only have 6 eyes. And they kind of look like they're wearing kneecaps to me, or knee pads, sorry. They are quite distinctive. And I think the British Arachnological Society are actually doing a recording scheme for these at the moment. At the end of the presentation, I've got a link to that website. If you wanted to provide them any records of cellar spiders, I think they'd be quite keen to have them. But that's one that you can definitely identify, and you can send me your records if you like. The next spider that you might find in your gardens or in the park, the walnut or web spider, Noctenia umbratica. It's quite distinctive in appearance. There's not really another spider that looks quite like it, purely because of its kind of flat appearance when you see it. Sometimes you might see it on a web, but other times you might find it sheltering next to the web, really squished down in fence posts and things like that. It looks to be really dark brown, almost black when you first see it. It's quite a pretty spider, and it's the only species in this family. So you might have come across that one. And it creates quite big orb webs. And the next one is a garden spider, Araneus diadematus. And this is the most common orb web spider that people come across. And you can tell this spider apart from the others based on the shape of the cross that's on its abdomen there. The colour variations can be bright, like really bright red. They can be brown, like in this example, or they can be pale yellow. So you can't always base colour on your species ID. But these spiders always have that cross kind of between where their shoulders might be, if that makes sense. And you can see that their legs are covered really spiny, and they have the classic orb web as well. And quite interestingly, you might find that if you've ever noticed, when their webs become damaged or they've been up for a long time and they kind of covered in pollen or dust, they eat their own webs to recycle the silk, and then they'll build a new one, which is quite cool. And another spider here, another orb weaver. This one's called the 4-spot orb weaver, Araneus quadratus. I feel like that's an easier Latin name to remember. The females of this species can be really large and quite globular looking, especially when they're gravid, which means they're full of eggs. They can be quite blobby looking when they're sat on their webs. The males are quite a bit smaller. But you can tell them apart because there are always 4 spots on its abdomen, which hopefully you can tell. You can see those 4 spots there, and they're always in that kind of position as well. But again, this is another spider that changes. It can have different colours, so it can have a bright red colour, and I've seen one that was even brighter red than this one. And I've seen some that were so dark brown that they almost looked black, and they were really pretty. And they can also be kind of pale yellow as well, but those 4 spots are always there. And again, they've got quite spiny legs. They're the same as the garden spider there in the Araneae family, Araneus. You can kind of tell, gives you a clue that they're in the same family. And the crab spider. So this is an interesting spider. This is the one that has the camouflage ability. So they're sexually dimorphic again. So that's where the males look differently from the females. If you can see in the top picture there, the males are a lot smaller than the females. And I think that they maybe do mate guarding. So the males will wait for the females to become sexually mature, and then they'll sneak in and fertilize them. And the females can change color depending on the flower that they're hiding in, waiting for a fly, well, waiting for a pollinator to come and land, and then they'll grab it. it's called the crab spider because its front 2 legs are a lot longer than its back 2 legs. It gives it that crab-like appearance. And interestingly, I've included here the distribution map, which is in the British Ethnological Society website. So according to this, it's got a southern distribution. I've included this because I think it's important to note that you can't always fully rely on the distribution maps, because a lot of the time this might just be where recorders are based. Sometimes it can give you a good idea about where spiders are as well, but I think that you need to bear it in mind and maybe consider that both options play a part. And I'm interested to see if anyone does manage to find any of these spiders in the gardens or in the park. And I'd be interested to see if you could send me those records, because it might show kind of a northward distribution, which some entomologists are finding based on rising temperatures. Some species are moving northwards, or it could be that this spider just hasn't been recorded further north. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And some good news. So you might have seen the article about the new spider that hasn't been recorded in a while, discovered down south again in an MOD training site, the great fox spider. So it was last seen in the 1990s in Dorset. They think it's really declined in numbers because of habitat loss. It requires quite specific habitat type. It requires heathland with sandy substrate. And a lot of heathlands revert kind of to scrub or woodlands if they're not managed. Also, some heathlands are managed with fire, which obviously would not be good for the spider. So that might be why it's not often found. But I'm hopeful that news stories like this that are a bit more positive might be giving spiders a bit of a better reputation. And I've noticed that Autumn Watch had a good piece on spiders as well last week. So yeah, hopefully it's a good sign that people are becoming interested in spiders. I've put a list here for some interesting articles, places you can purchase things if you wanted to. So the two field guides that I mentioned, they aren't very expensive. They're about £20 each. If you were starting out and you just wanted to buy one, and with Christmas coming up, you might want to put it on your Christmas list, I would probably start with the Wild Guides book, the newer version that I pointed out before, which I really recommend. It's a great one for starting out. I've included here a link to an article National Geographic wrote about spiders' webs that was quite interesting. And also the Field Studies Council have been giving a range of presentations during lockdown. And one of them was about spiders you can ID during lockdown, which was really interesting as well. So I suggest that if you found spiders interesting today, you might want to watch that as well. Okay, and thank you for attending. And yeah, Jeff, if there's any questions for me, let me know.
Thanks, Steph. That's excellent. And celebratory fireworks to end it with.
Could you hear them? It's my neighbours across the road. Sorry.
Thanks for that great trip around the world of spiders. Starting with some hugely technical stuff and coming back to the ones we see in our homes. So we do have a few questions. The first being about spiders' eyes and whether the more prominent ones are more sort of the primary visual eyes, or do they have different functions?
I think that's probably the case. I think that would be a good guess. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, to be honest, I'm fairly new to spiders myself. I've only really been interested in them the past 5 years. But I think that their eyes mostly pick up light. And obviously the bigger the eye, the more light that they're picking up. So I think that's probably the case that they rely on those eyes more. Or it could be the case that I'm thinking of jumping spiders that have to gauge distances. Maybe it's got something to do with that as well. It helps them plan where they're jumping to, if that makes sense. But yeah, I don't know for sure.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned at the start, a lot of people have a fear or even a disgust of spiders. Is that well understood? Does it vary in different cultures, do you know?
I don't know. I've heard that possibly it's something that we've adapted with, because I've heard other stories about people that have an innate fear of snakes, for example. Might be something that's evolved with us to have a fear of them, or it could just be, I was watching Autumn Watch last week and they did mention that it could just be the behavior of how a spider moves that creeps us out. But I honestly used to be absolutely petrified of them. And when I actually studied them and I looked at them under the microscope and I've learned all these interesting facts about them, I'm really not scared of them anymore at all. So I do think the best cure if you are afraid of spiders is to actually find out about them and learn.
And I think you've definitely got plenty of fans on the talk, because we've had a suggestion rather than a question about maybe another year we could have a spider field trip.
That would be brilliant. Yeah, I'd be definitely up for that. Yeah.
And a possible destination, another question, is that Grasswood up near Grassington, which is one of the reserves, as you probably know, we help support, has old records of the green huntsman spider, Micromata virescens.
Yeah.
Paul Millard has looked but not found it. Have you any tips as to how best to look for it?
I'm sure he's doing the right things. Look in the right habitat at the right time of year. That's all you can do, really. It's luck of the draw sometimes. Yeah, hopefully it's still there. And I think that they do flux as well, because they are so reliant on their prey species. That when their prey are in flux, sometimes they'll have a bigger year than others. Yeah, it's a tricky one. But yeah, it's only one way to find out, isn't there? So I'd be interested in that.
And a further one, really about coming back to the spiders that we find in our homes. When we throw them out, I typically don't get far from the door and just throw them. Should I really be going to the trouble and putting them in a suitable habitat, or will they be quite happy and scurry off assuming they don't get eaten on the way anywhere?
I think you might know the answer to that already, but you might not want to admit it. But I think I don't think they like it, because they're in your house because they like the warmth, and they're away from predators. So when you do put them out, it does put them at risk and makes them vulnerable. I think they're quite good at finding their way back in.
That's the other concern.
Yeah, I tend to personally, I'm quite happy with the cellar spiders. They can stay, and I have to admit the giant house spiders sometimes freak me out because they're so big and unpredictable. But I keep them in the house, but I just move them away from where I am or where I'm likely to be. They're okay to stay in the attic or whatever, under the stairs. That's fine. Yeah. But I would say, is kind of on that point, how we can all do small things to help spiders. And I mentioned how, because of their position in the ecosystem, because they're reliant on prey and also they're food for other things, it's important to try and have as much diversity as you can. And when we can't control what's out there in nature, but we can control what's in our gardens. So I would say to try and keep your garden if you can, as diverse in habitat as possible, and have like sheltered ground areas where things can hide on the ground, and also some taller grasses or flowers, and possibly some even taller trees or shrubs as well. Try and increase the diversity if you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was feeling slightly bad about, am I all right to throw them out? But not as bad now, having had the question, can they survive being hoovered up?
Oh, I don't know.
Probably depends on the type of vacuum, I think.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But also, I suspect after they've been hoovered up, they're going out. So I'm not sure
That's
that's a
true.
way for them to be kept in the house.
No, I mean, I'm hoping that after this talk, people will be less inclined to remove the spiders and more inclined to let them live alongside them in harmony. I don't know.
Well, that's all the questions, Steph. So thanks ever so much for dealing with those. I will just close by saying you have been presenting amongst your audience of probably the best part of 100 people tonight, including to George McGavin. So well done.
Well, I'm glad you didn't tell me until now.
There was a reason we didn't tell you.
Well, I'm really glad to have so many people interested in learning more about spiders.
Oh, well done. I'll pass you back to Helen now.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it just remains for me to say, Steph, what a fantastic talk. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I think most of us have now got a new lockdown project, which we'll be very pleased to have. I think you've probably gone and made an awful lot more work for yourself as the spider report, because we're all going to be out there trying to build houses and gardens. I'm pretty sure the ones that I asked you about earlier today, I think they might be cellar spiders. They certainly looked to me like your picture of the cellar spiders, but I'm definitely going to have a closer look. I haven't got a microscope, but maybe I'll be able to manage with a hand lens and figure out what they are. I think you did the most amazing talk, which covered a kind of range of different aspects of spiders. But I think what we will all have particularly appreciated is the really practical focus of it. You know, we've all got the means now, you know, to know how to go about making a start, figuring out our own spiders. And for a society like ours, you know, that's what it's all about. It's about getting out there ourselves and trying to do it ourselves. So thank you so much for that, Steph. I think everyone here will have had a lovely evening. And just before we go, I just want to remind people of what the next talk will be. It's going to be on the 17th of November, also a Tuesday. And it's going to be our very own Ian Brand, and he's going to be talking on the subject of plants, pills and potions, explaining how many modern medicines have arisen from plants. So I'm sure that will be terrific. Try not to miss it, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks' time. And thanks very much again to Steph.
Thank you too, and thanks to the Wharfedale Naturalists for running these talks. It's a brilliant idea and well done. Thank you.